Ms. Berkeley, would you please call the roll?
Good evening, board members.
Evening.
Dr. Thornton,
Here.
Mr. Burrows, Ms. Ahmed, Ms. Boozer Strother,
Here.
Ms. Eubanks, Mr. Murray, Mr. Montero, Ms. Page, Ms. Queen, Ms. Shepherd, Mr. Thomas, Mr. Valentine, Mr. Wallace,
Here.
Mrs. Williams. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Berkeley. Let me take this opportunity to thank Ms. Berkeley, you, as the lead staff person in staffing this effort. We appreciate your work. And I also want to thank the board staff generally for their support of these work sessions. I also want to thank Mr. Wallace, Mr. Valentine, Ms. Ahmed, and others who serve on the Policy and Budget Committee for bringing us to this point. The Board of Education is convened this evening for the sole purpose of discussing the fiscal year 2020 budget. The work session this evening is the first of 3 budget work sessions and 3 public hearings that the board is conducting to develop its budget submission for consideration by the county executive and the county council. The purpose of these budget work sessions is to fine-tune the budget proposal sent to us by Dr. Golson, our CEO, so that it meets all of our highest priorities and represents the best spending plan that will serve all of our students and staff across the county. This budget discussion will include a focus on special education and student services, information technology, accountability, and chief of staff. I will now turn the session over to Dr. Golson for an opening statement regarding this evening's discussion. Dr. Golson.
Thank you. Good evening. Each of you have received a PowerPoint which summarizes the proposal that I presented on December 13th. Just want to highlight, beginning at slide number 4, there were 3 requests proposed on December 13th. That's $46 million for employee compensation, $4.2 million for student and staff safety, $12 million for class size reduction for grades K through 3. What's included in the base is all of the programs and resources we provided from previous years, so this is a request for additional. Though I won't go over it tonight, you can find updated proposed figures, which also includes the governor's proposed budget that has not been approved yet, on slide 10. So in an effort to ensure that we have enough time for board questions for the 5 divisions that are presenting today, I now turn it over to the very first chief, which will be the Division of Special Education and Student Services. It's now open for questions.
Oh, okay. There's no presentation then. Okay, very good. Thank you. Let me, first of all, thank members of the board, led by Mr. Wallace, for securing from the CFO and our Chief Executive Officer responses for many, many questions. And I want to thank you all for responding to those questions. And board colleagues, I especially want to thank you all for submitting those questions over the past several weeks and getting responses. It informs our work and makes tonight's meeting much more efficient. We will now begin with questions from the Board of Education. We will adhere to the 5-minute and 3-minute rule, colleagues. So board members will have a first round of no more than 5 minutes and a second round of no more than 3 minutes. So I'll recognize you, please, Mr. Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, everyone, for coming to our first budget work session and public hearing. I just had a quick question regarding student services. And I floated this idea after a conversation I had, and I'll back up. Every year I go to both of the high schools in my district, Dr. Henry Wise and Suitland High School. I meet with student leaders and advocates from both of those schools, particularly SGA members. And I floated this idea to PGRAS maybe 2 years ago of formulating some type of fund or initiative to increase student pride in their own schools. And I kind of grounded myself in an idea that if we had a pool of money, a pot of money, maybe $75,000, and middle and high school students, through their advisors in SGA or their club advisors, could propose or write a grant to your office or the Student Services office and seek out supplemental funds to fund projects, initiatives, events in their school to increase student pride in their school. Presently, does this department have that type of infrastructure in place that if the board were to have a small pool of money, maybe not this budget, but is there infrastructure in place to support an initiative like that?
Good evening, and thank you very much, board members. Board Member Wallace, the Department of Student Services, as a result of ESSA, now has a Title IV grant, which provides us with a range of opportunities to address the needs of our students that help to promote safety and health and wellness of our students, and pride activities could be a part of that. So although the FY20 grant has already been developed, we can certainly look at that particular funding source through the FY21 planning cycle and develop that grant where we could take a look at opportunities in that area for our students.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Next board member with a question. Is there another question from a board member? Ms. Ahmed.
Dr. Mason, if you would indulge me for a moment, on page 279 of the budget book,
Yes.
the absolute last line there is a line for therapists, and it shows an increase of $416,000 for therapists, but if I'm looking at the staffing number on the previous page, there is no increase in the number of full-time equivalents for therapists. So I'm wondering, why is the budget going up, but we're not adding any more employees?
So what you're looking at there is the funding for the positions. So what's figured into that line specifically is the amount of salary increase that are projected for the same staff to roll over into the next year.
Is that irrespective of any type of compensation review?
So what's included in terms of overall salary increases in this budget is anything that has already been negotiated from previously, as well as a reserve for what might occur in the future. This does not, the money that we have budgeted does not include the money, though, for the compensation task force, because we won't have that data available until later.
Okay, thank you. And then I noticed on the student services side, there's an increase of 2 FTE for psychologists. At a previous board meeting, some of the psychologists in our system came to us and testified about the drastic ratio discrepancy between what is recommended by their National Association of School Psychologists and what we actually have, and what a lot of the systems across Maryland actually have. Their recommendation is 1 psychologist per every 500 to 700 students. And what we're at is 1 psychologist for every 1,400 or 1,500 students. And other school districts also have this problem, but I wonder if there are ways that we can be a solution and find a solution to be able to bridge that gap. Only because I think there are many needs for so many of our students. And Dr. Mason, I know that you know, you've been working in this field for student services and special education and doing your due diligence as much as possible to serve our students. But I just wonder if there are ways that we can work to increase that amount even further. Are there plans for that in the future?
It's definitely a plan in the future, and what I wanted to do is to look at it on an incremental basis. I think it's important for us to be strategic in terms of how much we ask for. The psychologists, when they testified at the last board meeting, asked for 25 positions, 25 FTEs. That would be an extraordinary amount in terms of a request for that number, and I think we would have difficulties, to be very frank, in even being able to fill that number of positions in FY20. But I do strongly believe in the need to incrementally increase while we also expand our partnerships with our mental health providers so that psychologists are also supported with some of the partners that we work with. And we're looking at a variety of partners that we can also expand through grants that will help us to meet the mental health needs of our students.
Okay, do you believe that other behavioral support staff, a mixture of psychologists with other behavioral support staff like crisis intervention counselors and therapists, would that be a more feasible solution?
I do believe that as we progress incrementally each and every year, that we should look at an increase in psychologists, behavioral specialists, licensed clinical social workers, all of those type of individuals that can assist in providing support to address the mental health needs of our children.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So Ms. Queen.
Question, going back to the psychologist services, I believe it was at our last meeting that it was stated by Dr. Golston, that's one of your team members, read that we were putting in to get more psychologists or therapists. It was a requesting for more of them? That wasn't what it was? Okay, so then scratch that out. So I'm looking at the budget, as she said, on page 289, and we already paid $11 million for psychology service, and I understand it's for the 504 and the IEP, but what type of partnership do we have with, and I would say like other health, like social service, like Medicare, like the state, like Blue Cross Blue Shield, because I know as a parent who has a child, when my child gets service, and even though it's at Central High School, I had to bring my medical card to get the services. So I'm trying to figure, if we're paying this much money for psychiatry service, what actually, and that's just for a therapist, what are we getting for these services?
Well, we first and foremost definitely have partnerships with many of our mental health providers in Prince George's County. And I also serve on the Systems of Care partnership, which is a collaboration between multiple mental health agencies in the entire Prince George's County in our school system to examine how to best provide supports. When you look at the response to the question about the utilization of psychologists, you see a reference in my response to the other agencies that we do use when students are in fact in crisis. And some of our specific services in special education require psychological services, so we have those psychologists assigned to provide support. But I believe that there's also, you were asking a specific question about the budget. Mm-hmm. You want to restate that for me one more time?
Well, I'm just, the specific question is, we're paying $11 million total for the service, as you see on page 289, and I'm trying to figure out what services are we getting for that much money. I understand the IEP, I understand the 504, I understand issues like this weekend when the kids die and then we have to have someone come out to school, yes. But I'm just trying to see what are we getting, because of the fact we have a lot of kids with issues, they get thrown out of school, they act up in school, but apparently somewhere down the line, we're not helping these kids, but we're paying a lot of money to be able to help these kids, but they're not getting the help.
So specifically, that 11 million does include, what we're actually looking at there is primarily the school psychologists themselves, which are 86 FTE in the current year. That's, I believe, 7.8 million on the salary side, plus the benefits, which aren't broken out here, makes up the vast majority of the actual the 11 million that you're referring to is the staff.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We can have our own.
Any other colleague wishing to ask questions? Mr. Round two, anyone else? You want to go first? Mr. Burrows?
Good evening, Dr. Mason.
Good evening.
Great great to see you. Also want to acknowledge the budget staff who worked so very hard. They have some of the best candy and Sasser in their office. So I hope to get that package this year. Dr. Mason, you know, your office has made significant strides over the last few years at sort of cleaning up some of the issues that you and I both know exist. What level of support is necessary to further support what you're trying to do? Because I'm still getting the same complaints about the IEPs and 504's implementation. And so, I mean, that is an area that, you know, I would like some greater clarity in, you know, what needs to happen in that arena, because if we're not implementing these IEPs properly, students aren't getting service properly, what could this board do in this budget to help with that issue?
Well, again, I want to thank you again for your advocacy and support of special education and student services. To begin with, in the area of 504, when we are made aware that there are concerns, we conduct internal audits of our different schools and provide explicit support and guidance to our schools to improve the quality of how 504 plans are being provided. We do feel that we have, at this time, from a central office perspective, enough staff to support the management and the monitoring of the implementation of 504 plans. But 504 and special education are complex, and there are going to be times in which you will receive email messages from parents where they do have concerns. And typically, once our central office staff investigates, we are able to go in, provide that support, make the corrective steps as needed, provide additional training to the staff as needed if we find that there, in fact, has been an error. I would not say pervasively that Prince George's County Public School System is failing to implement 504s and IEPs. We, in fact, are seeing evidence when we go in and provide support in those instances in which a concern is brought to our attention. It's very similar statistically as it is for any other neighboring jurisdiction. Sometimes you're going to have difficult cases, but our central office staff goes in, provides support, and provides training. So our goal basically is to make sure we monitor closely, that we follow up on those particular cases and any concern that a parent does have. But I do applaud many of our schools for the work that they've done. You know, there have been instances in which we've had due process hearings in our district. I need the board to know that we have won those due process hearings because the very teachers that you support, our PTCEA teachers, they are prepared, they testify, they have their data, it is compelling about the work that they're able to show that demonstrates that they are serving students. But in instances in which we know that there is an error, we will then correct that, supplement the support that those parents and children deserve, and we will also provide training to the staff. So we feel that we're equipped to do that, and every concern we have been able to address.
I'm very interested in working with my colleagues to have a sort of listening session around this issue, and you know, maybe have a listening session with our special education teachers, our parents, which I know you already do with the parents regularly.
Yes, I do.
But I would love to have a listening session with some of the teachers around this. My next question goes to the chief of staff's budget. Are we over student services?
No, we're just on student services.
Okay, I apologize. Okay, then another question. Similar to what Ms. Ahmed, Ms. Queen have raised, there seems to be a deficit in the amount of mental health services and supports for our students. And I'm seeing it every single day now, especially with our ELL population, the family reunification, process, depression. I'm seeing a lot of these issues, and could you just speak to Ms. Queen and Ms. Ahmed's point? I feel like the board should be doing more in this area to support students, and I think we want to do more in this budget. Could you speak to what is necessary on our side, or what we need to increase in order to better support our students going through these adverse childhood experiences?
Well, I believe that as we think about the complexity of children who are English language learners and the complexity of their background and experiences. One of the things that we want to do is also look at hiring psychologists who have a bilingual background, who can communicate and can relate to the needs of those particular families, since your focus was primarily on, in your question about that particular population. But I do want you to know that as a Department of Student Services, we have a mental health coordinator, we have an array of mental health providers, and my team is getting ready to analyze every single set of partners that we have in our district to see how we can make sure that we deploy the right therapeutic support and providers to those schools to support the needs of students. I know, again, that your advocation, of course, is how can you increase the budget to give us more psychologists to provide that support. I would say that, you can certainly, if you desire, certainly to recommend an increase in the number of psychologists. However, my goal is to really utilize my Title IV grant funds to really offset some of the implications for the school system, because in the past, Student Services didn't have a Title IV grant. Now we do. So that gives us another pot of funds to really be able to plan and organize activities that can support our students. And so I really want to make sure that I'm maximizing the utilization of that Title IV grant in the way to meet the mental health needs of the children described by, Board Member Queen and Ahmed.
And then board staff could ensure that, I would like to get a copy of that Title IV grant.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Burrows. Ms. Williams and then Mr. Wallace.
Excuse me, can you repeat that request so I can jot that down?
I'd like to get a copy of the Title IV grant and whatever we're doing in that division related to mental health of students.
Mr. Wallace, I'm sorry, Ms. Williams.
Good evening.
Good evening.
First, I'd like to congratulate you all on this wonderful budget. The biggest addition here is the expected outcomes. I think that is so helpful in giving us the opportunity to do our job as oversight, to see that the money is being used and it meets the goal that you all have laid out. I think that being that you all are the experts in the education compared to us that sit on the board, since you're delivering the service, I'm going to assume that the thought process of the staffing and resources that you're asking for matches the goals that are listed here. With that said, I just have a question about the unrestricted funds that are in the Chief of Special Education's office. Over the past few years, we've gone from 2 to 3, and we're back down to 2. Looking at the salaries and wages for that group, compared to last year, we've gone up $100,000. And so I just wanted an explanation as to that increase. This is on page 275.
Yes.
So the difference here is towards in the second section on page 275, the second assignments instructional was about $46,000, and that's what's accounting for the increase in that area. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, that's the area, but the increase is about $110,000, and I'm assuming that the administrative secretary and associate superintendent are the same and as to last year, so I'm just trying to understand the increase.
Yeah, so I think we'll have to look into the specifics of what has dropped off from the approved 19 to the estimated and make sure that that's represented correctly, but that we'll get you an answer of exactly what that
Okay.
is.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Mr. Wallace. Well, let me, this would be a second round for you, right, Mr. Wallace? Okay. Let me ask the question then before you then regarding this. Dr. Golson, when it comes to special ed, Prince George's County serves a large number of students for the state. We may be, I guess, next to Baltimore City, the largest catchment of those students. One of the things that was done by the state in 2001 was to have a funding multiplier that drove resources to those students. You might not have an answer to this, but maybe something we need to look at, but the anticipated infusion of funds from the state to serve the students that we're talking about as a result of equitable and adequate funding for special needs students. That's not really a question, but it's an observation, because I think our board colleagues and myself are rightfully concerned about how you support these students, psychologists, and those counselors and others who serve these students. The multiplier effect coming from state funding allows us to address that. So, and I know you all are monitoring for us what the state is doing in terms of having a formula that drives resources to our kids. So can we stay on top of that? As we go through the budget sessions, we can get some progress on that, because the things that we're looking to get funded for our kids that our board members are concerned about, the multiplier effect is very serious. You can have a multiplier effect of 0.43 versus 0.93, and that's a choice that someone makes.
Yes, and we'll make sure that we provide what that actual multiplier is so that our community knows.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mr. Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I neglected to see my notes on the other 5 pages, so I'll go quick with my 3 minutes. First,
Okay.
number one, on page 253 in the special education section, I just want to get I always ask every budget, just a quick update on the students that are in the autism program. I know that it was at Skyline, but I know it was divided up. Just want to get a quick check-in on that. And I believe that the deaf and hard of hearing program that was at Andrew Jackson has been relocated. Could you just give us a brief update on those 2 special education programs?
Our budget, in terms of our request for teachers, is to address our increase in the autism population in our district. We're currently in the process of trying to refine and create and design for FY20 an elementary level model that will better address the needs of students with autism with intellectual disabilities. Skyline, however, and Suitland continue to get support from central office to monitor, and I know that my director of special ed toured Barnaby Manor recently, is also one of the sites that was opened up once Skyline, the program there, closed. In terms of our students, the deaf and hard of hearing program, they are doing extraordinarily well. We received a wonderful email message today, hoping that we can acknowledge the work of a wonderful principal at the elementary school, Doswell Brooks, who's just done a phenomenal job of accepting our students. She has acquired sign language as a skill and has really embraced that population. So it has been a very successful transition.
As also, I'm always reluctant to lose a program in District 7, but for the betterment of the program, I'm very thankful to hear that the transition is going well.
Yes, it has.
My next question is going back to student services. And I just had a quick question. I should have asked it last year. On page 287, looks like there's a line item on the unrestricted fund around textbooks. And just correct me if my information is wrong. Those textbooks are different than what will be discussed at later budget work sessions when we talk about line items and supporting textbooks for academic programs.
Yes.
Yes, so this is budgeted specifically in the special education office, but there are in the student services office, there are additional textbooks also in other areas.
Mm-hmm. We serve students who are on home and hospital teaching. We have access to those resources to be able to support our students in those.
And that's why I thought that program was funds before.
Yes.
And I asked this over the next week or next 2 weeks around textbooks, but has there been a transition into e-textbooks so we can lower the cost? I know printed textbooks cost a lot more to buy, but I know last budget I brought the question about moving to e-textbooks and one-to-one devices. But in this request, will those textbooks be e-textbooks?
So we continue to, when we make our textbook purchases, we do purchase the online resource for those schools that are one-to-one. But it's important to know that many of those textbook vendors now offer it for the same cost.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. And, yes, Ms. Ahmed.
Dr. Mason, I just wanted to express some of my concerns for our special centers. I represent C. Elizabeth Reed, which is one of our special centers, and I know that there are 3 more in the district. My concern there is that I know there are really hardworking teams at each of those schools, but in terms of the operations, it's a wonder to me sometimes how they're able to fully operate and maintain a level of balance, especially on when we're looking at the number of folks that are in and working in the building. So for one administrator or a small team of administrators in a building, they're managing 100, 200 staff that are coming through that building, as well as being the point of contact for IEP and 504 meetings. I just am concerned about almost the burden that is placed on our teams that are working to manage those specific centers. So I wonder, are there any supports that can be put in place to assist them?
I will say that over the past budget cycle, we provided additional funds to support principals with the process of providing observations and some of that support that they had asked for. And Ms. Bowman and I used our funds through second assignment monies to be able to create additional staff person there to provide that kind of additional administrative support. Now, the teacher to student ratio or guidelines that we use are very comparable to neighboring jurisdictions that serve that population of students. So it sounded as though your question was more concerned about the administrative oversight of the school. Is that correct?
There is a bit of concern on that, and I just want to make sure that all of our folks that are managing our schools, and especially our special centers, feel and are well supported.
Yes.
And being able to execute, being the instructional leader, the staffing point of contact, the IEP and 504 points of contact, or the buck stops with them when it comes to all of those things. Additionally, it's difficult because I know that a lot of the folks that are in special centers, the students have behavioral issues, but it's a function of their disability that some of this occurs, and so things like suspensions don't occur. And I know that we add or we look to provide supports to other schools, to traditional schools, for by looking at things like, are there multiple suspensions going on in the school? Does the school need extra support? And in those cases at our special centers, that's not happening because we're not suspending students because it's a function of their disability. And so I'm worried on that sense, that level as well, that are they receiving those supports when we're not tracking certain things?
Well, I will say in terms of the regional schools, when you think about the size, Margaret Brent is a smaller regional school. It is not the size of C. Elizabeth Reed because they no longer have their high school population. Tanglewood is also a much smaller school. So C. Elizabeth Reed is really the largest regional school that we currently serve. I know that Ms. Bowman has worked directly with the principal at C. Elizabeth Reed. Will continue to do that, to take a look at any concerns or issues that she will raise. And of course, those principals also report to an instructional director, so we'll work in partnership with them to address any concerns.
All right, I just encourage your further look in how we can continue to support those individuals. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Ms. Ahmed. And we'll recognize Ms. Williams for her second round, 3 minutes.
My question is around the school nurses. On page 285, we have different types of nurses listed with the registered nurses listed at 200. So in my mind, that is one nurse for every school around about. what would you say is the challenge for having a nurse at every school?
The challenge is similar to what I shared with the board members at the beginning of this school year. Nursing basically is a national shortage. We've worked in collaboration with the health department around ideas for how to increase the number of nurses that come into our district. The former director of the health department even suggested that many nurses today may even want to work part-time rather than having a full-time position. And so most recently, in working with the Department of Human Resources, we've even advertised for part-time positions so that we can attract those who may be interested. We currently have 33 vacancies. Now, there are others who have left us also because the pay in the medical world is certainly greater than it would be in a school system environment. So some of them have chosen to go on the more clinical side or in a medical arena to work versus being in a school. But our challenge does stem from the national crisis that we do have with a shortage of nursing and the fact that we're going to have to look at a different model. The old days of thinking that we may have a 1.0 FTE nurse in a school may not any longer exist. It may be a part-time nurse, and we'll have to look at how we partner with a nurse in a neighboring school. So we'll have to continue to explore ideas around that, and we're very open to, any progressive ideas that we can think of that, can help us in that area.
So I'm very familiar with the school nurse. My mother-in-law retired as the lead school nurse for the Philadelphia school system.
Yes.
She took on the position because she had a child, and to have her schedule match her child, that was best. But not every nurse has that option,
Yes.
nor think in that way. But the thought that crossed my mind is that we have in our school system the medical program, and there are a lot of technical schools that help people become, medical technicians.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there is a law or requirement that says that only a nurse could be in that school, but if there is a possibility that we could have a medical technician in that school to do the things that, not the things that a nurse would do, but those things like clean a cut, be there to take someone's temperature and things like that, we can begin to at least triage the children until we get the nurse in the building when there is something serious. So just a thought.
Thank you.
To just try to help support the schools with the challenges, especially if you have a school of 500 students and they're elementary age. So we know now all the sniffles and all the germs. So that is just my suggestion. Thank you.
You very much.
Colleagues, Mr. Burrows, I'm sorry, for your second one.
Just wanted to recognize my grandmother's daughters in the room, Monique Anderson Walker, our council member for District 8. Thank you for joining us, and please tell them I said hello.
Is that Councilwoman? Hey, can I claim you? You were my student. I'm so proud of you. You made an A in my class, by the way. I'm sorry, Ms. Boozer.
Thank you very much. I do want to second my colleagues on concern about if we're staffing appropriately on mental health services as well as aides in our classrooms, particularly our kindergarten classrooms, supports for special education. But another question I have that I couldn't see readily in the budget is about if we are expending any funds on screening for dyslexia and training of teachers in screening tools, and if that's reflected in this budget year.
I do believe that was also one of the responses that was provided. Let me go back and double check, because I do recall that that question was raised. While I'm looking for that, I would like for you to know that the dyslexia organization with Ellen O'Neill has met with Trinell Bowman and I and continues to work with Trinell Bowman. They awarded us a $30,000 grant to do a body of work, again, to expand our work around looking at the screeners that are used to make sure that we can address early on those students who might be at risk for not being able to be proficient, readers. And Ellen has been very complimentary of the leadership that the Department of Special Education has done around this particular area. So I just want to assure you that our district has been recognized by Ellen O'Neill for the work that we've done. Let's see. And if you take a look at question number 2, that response is there.
Mr. Murray?
Good evening, everyone. Hi, Dr. Mason. My first question is, could you provide the average caseload size for our special educators in the county?
Well, it depends upon what level you're referring to. So let's talk about secondary, where I tend to think that there's a lot of energy in that area for high school special education teachers. So the average case size can certainly be between 20 to 25 students per case size. That could be typical for a high school. So it depends upon, again, the size of the high school, how the caseloads are divided up, the number of special ed teachers, and so forth. But it could be about 20.
Okay. I'll follow up via email, but would love to get just some numbers on, like, averaging out across the district and seeing how we compare to surrounding jurisdictions. I know I'd asked this question previously, but do you know where we stand right now in terms of the number of special education teacher vacancies in the district?
I believe our last count, we were at about 21, but I can double check that.
21, okay. And what kind of services are provided for when we do have those vacancies for those students in the interim?
So the Director of Special Education, wherever there's a vacancy, puts together a support plan for that school. So there's a team that's responsible for providing support to the existing teachers that are there, supporting and answering questions around the IEP process, helping to ensure that the timelines are met for assessment. So we know that we still have to be in compliance. So that support plan is developed with a very intentional effort to make sure that we're not out of compliance. And we look at how the caseloads are divided up among, existing teachers when there is a vacancy.
Thank you for that. Do you know if there are any speech or OT vacancies currently?
Well, we're very fortunate that in the area of speech, because of our additional model of DOCON therapy, this is the first year, and I think Prince George's County's many, many years, we do not have a vacancy in speech.
That's wonderful.
And OT and PT has not been an area of concern for us as a district as well.
That's great to hear. A question looking at like academic interventions, it's my understanding that principals and schools kind of have the ability to like opt into purchasing different curriculums or interventions. I feel like there could be some cost saving potential for the district if, we were to make some decisions about what kinds of things, for example, if you're a struggling elementary school reader, there's some research-based things that are better than others. So am I off on that, or?
We actually provide a list of resources in mathematics and reading English language arts for our staff to select from. It's approved vendors, and they're based on the tiered intervention approach.
Gotcha. So we still end up paying like on the higher end of things just because we're opting in like school by school, right? Instead of like a bigger approach.
So actually this year, as we looked at contracted services, that was part of the $19.3 million we were able to save, because we were able to look to see what departments overlapped and where we could make some of those reductions.
That's great to know. A question about the 2% increase in part goal that's listed for special education students. What does the plan look like in terms of how we intend to accomplish that goal?
Well, in order to accomplish that goal, the Department of Special Education has to collaborate with the Department of Curriculum and Instruction under Dr. Libby. And that body of work is done to look at our instructional practices, to verify whether or not there's evidence of utilizing evidence-based interventions and strategies to improve the outcomes for our students. Ms. Bowman and I recognize that, to be quite frank, Prince George's County Public Schools special education students really are at the bottom of when you compare them to other jurisdictions in the state of Maryland. So we want to address the areas of reading, language, arts, and mathematics. The selection of appropriate interventions is critical and key, and the implementation of them with fidelity. So those are the things that have to be done in order to improve those outcomes.
One more follow-up on that, and then just one more question. Have we been trending in the right direction generally in terms of special education park scores? Stagnant, declining, do you know?
Right now, to me, they've been, the last comparison, they've been rather, for special ed, stagnant. While the overall county received a 2%, increase for my special ed students, we have not. But I want to remind the board of one thing. We are finally getting more of our students access to the general education curriculum. When you have served children historically in self-contained classes with teachers who are not certified in the content area, don't have the rich content knowledge and background, our students don't benefit as well. So by moving in the direction that we are, right now we're at about 71.6% of our students being included. Over time, we're going to see evidence of our students beginning to achieve and to demonstrate growth.
That's great to hear. And my last question, following up on some of Ms. Williams' questions, I share similar concerns about the nurse vacancies in the county. So do we currently contract with staffing agencies? Like for my school, for example, we do.
Yes.
So we do, and
So
we still, even with that, are not able?
Even with that, we contract with agencies as well as hire our own nurses. So we are exploring. I really want to assure the board, and I, again, welcome any and all ideas, as Ms. Williams just gave us one, but anything that can help us, we really want to make sure. But I do want to assure the board of this, that our nurse managers in schools where there's a vacancy, they do what's called a medical acuity assessment of that school. They assess what the critical needs are of any child in that building, so there's a plan in place. Every principal also has access to a resource guide or tool, and also the nurse manager is connected to that school very closely and will meet with any parent whose child is in a school without a nurse to review what that medical plan of support is. So we're working very hard to try to address that deficit.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Murray. Colleagues, I'm going to recognize Ms. Queen, and we need to move to the next category. The public session starts at 7, and we have to get through 3 more. So, Ms. Queen?
Thank you. Going back to the nurses, I do notice that we have 200 registered nurses. We have 10 nurse specialists and 21 practical nurses. And when you add them up, that's 231. We have 207 schools. And you said we were short 30-something nurses. But if you add that up, we still should just about have a nurse at every school.
Well, the reason why we don't is because we also have to have nurses who work at a central level because they're addressing the need. So we have nurse managers who are responsible for providing services for a variety of schools, a subset of our schools. So I just want you to know that we don't have enough to be able to cover all of those. If we did, I would not have the 33 vacancies that I do.
Okay.
And this has been a persistent problem for Prince George's County now for a number of years.
And I want to thank you for that, but I want us to think about relocating some of them inside the schools, and that way a nurse is at the schools if needed. And as I go back to actually the support service, I noticed on page, what was it, page 289, we have school health, and you got $20 million to spend for that. May I ask, what is school health? What includes that? What is included in that? Is that the nurses and what else?
What is that page number again, please?
Page 289.
Thank you.
It says school health, $20 million is spent on that. Does that include the nurses, and what else is included in that besides the nurses?
Yeah, so that area breaks out the previous few pages in a slightly different way, where we're looking at, on page 285, most of that is likely the salaries of the licensed practical nurses, nurse administrators,
Okay,
nurse
so
specialists,
that
and
includes all.
registered nurses.
Okay, so that include all of that. Thank you. And then my last question is going back to the psychological services at the schools, which is very important. I noticed that we said we had 84 psychiatrists on page 285, but knowing the issues and knowing that we have a prison, the pipeline going on in Prince George's County Public Schools, we have to make sure that we have psychiatrists at every school. I visited Central High School on yesterday, and one of the students said to me, who has a therapist there, she has changed 4 therapists in the last 2 years, and she need her therapist services to deal with the issues, the everyday issues that we never thought about when we were going to school, that these kids have to deal with. We have to do better to make sure that therapists and psychologists are at the schools, because our children are facing things that we never thought about facing before, and we cannot keep suspending them, as was said before, and that's what we are doing with suspending them. We're suspending them for things. We cannot keep doing that when they need the proper services. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Dr. Golson, we'd like now to move to the information technology category. And colleagues, as you proceed with your questions, we have about 38 minutes before we have the public session. Colleagues, I'll now recognize you for questions regarding information technology. Are there questions? Mr. Wallace.
Just one thing, Dr. Thornton's chair. I'm not sure which department Dr. Watts falls under, but I, like many in the county, have downloaded the PGCPS smartphone app on my phone, and I've only subscribed to get notifications from District 7 schools. But there are only 2 schools of the 19 that I have that actively use the smartphone app. And I'm wondering not only the money that the board has funded that very important initiative, but how effective it's being used if I can only get 2 notifications. I know there's multiple ways that schools communicate with their constituencies and their parents and their students. But are there any professional development courses that your division, tied with talent and talent development, can provide to school leaders to effectively use that smartphone app that I think has been well integrated, but it's just not being utilized?
Good evening, board members.
Good evening, sir.
Mr. Wallace, I'm assuming that you're referring to the Blackboard app. So, yes, sir, there are individual schools that, if you will, utilize it more than others. So it's not mandatory to use the Blackboard app, but many, there are teachers that come in for training. We have a training team, and the individual classrooms, those teachers utilize that app with their students and the parents. Okay, but as you know, we have a lot of teachers, and not all of them take advantage of that.
So in the school, imagine Morningside, they send one every day. Most of those notifications come from individual teachers, or does it come from the school leader, the principal or vice principal?
It can come from both, okay. But the original, if you will, the original purpose of that application was for teachers to communicate with their students and the parents. Okay, but principals can take advantage of that and communicate with their whole population, all their parents and the students, so they do have that option as well.
And finally, Mr. Chair, has there been any talks with the administration, your team, Dr. Golson, about consolidating the means of communication to make it simplified? I have parents that have to subscribe to 4 or 5 different forms of communication to get it from the principal, from 4 of their teachers, from their elected officials. We have Gov Delivery, but folks use Google Classroom, they're using
social media, sure.
Everything.
So I think the communications office, if you will, lead the charge with how to communicate with the whole population. Again, I want to go back to Blackboard. The original purpose for Blackboard was for teachers to communicate with just their parents and their students, not necessarily the whole population, but it was meant for that purpose. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Mr. Burrows.
Also, just want to acknowledge to see we have Valerie Campbell, Civic Association leader, Mrs. Heiler, PTSA leader, Jana Parker here, Felix from PGCEA. Thank you all for joining the board tonight. And also welcome to District 8, everyone else.
Thank you.
That's right. Wes, I appreciate all the innovative things that you've done in your division. You and Ms. Dent, do amazing things in IT. My question goes to the property audits that I'm reading.
Yes, sir.
If we are distributing property from your division to schools, and it's not there when we go and look for it,
Yes,
that's
sir.
a real issue. And so you could speak to that.
So the last 10 or so audits that you have recently reviewed, I had an opportunity to review as well. So in this case, I've started reviewing them basically after the fact. So I saw the final reports. So I met with both finance and I met with internal audit and talked to them about how we could improve that process. Okay, so there were a couple things that occurred. So one, there was a list of equipment that was missing. Okay, and there's modern tools today, especially if it's a mobile device, that we can use technology to locate those tools. And in many cases, we went back and found hundreds of those devices. And I think you may have seen those reports. I don't know if you read that or had an opportunity. Another area is one of the things that I argued, if you will, with internal audit is they put the original price of the devices, and I agree with that, but I think that you also have to put the depreciated price of a device. So if a device is 6 years old, okay, usually a computer, we depreciate a computer over 48 months. Okay, so a computer that's 6 years old that might be missing this year that wasn't missing last year is a little different than a brand new computer that's missing, right now. So there was a couple things. Another thing that I noticed, and this happens in our school district, is we have a lot of turnover in leadership. Okay, and when a school gets new leadership, I believe we need to do a property audit during that transition. Okay, we need to have, if we're going to hold individuals accountable, we need to make sure that when a new person comes in, they know the property that they have. It's not 2 years later we're doing an audit, a property audit, and then we're saying, hey, this is your responsibility, when no audit was done at that time. Okay, so there was a few things. There was many of those audits, and I don't know, did you see my responses to the audits? Did you get an opportunity to see those?
It wasn't your thorough response.
Okay, so if it's okay with the, if it's okay with the team, I'll make sure that you get those. In many cases, we found a lot of those devices. Okay, so I'd like you to get an update on that so that you can see what we've found. And what we do is we use tools to find them through IP addresses. We use Active Directory. We use Google Management tools. And we can clearly see that computer was logged into yesterday at the school by this person. So we have that information.
Thank you, and I would love to see your response to those audits. And also, it makes perfect sense that you're suggesting to do a property audit when new leadership comes in.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Burris. Ms. Ahmed.
Welcome back, Dr. Watts.
Thank you, Ms.
Back up on the stage. Dr. Watts, printing services comes under you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I wanted to thank your team, your printing services team, for taking my students from Bowie High School around during our Student Shadow Day. They had a blast, and it was really great to see how the inner workings of our system operate. So I appreciate that and thank your team on my behalf. My one question around printing services is something that was brought up by a teacher in the district who reached out and requested or asked about the viability, the efficiency of printing progress reports. As I know it, and I think as a lot of parents and students and teachers understand, the minute a progress report comes out, it's already two weeks later than it's not an in-time estimate, it's 2 weeks late. So what I think would be helpful for me is to understand the financial impact of doing progress reports and be able to continue a discussion on whether or not we want to do them in the future or whether we can use those funds in a more effective way.
So I could certainly get that information, and as you well know, we have an online application that you can go in and see your grades and attendance at any time. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Queen?
Thank you. Yes, I have a question concerning IT technology and software. I just want to know what part of the budget, your budget, I guess, actually material IT technology is used toward the classroom or support the students at home. Is it any part of your budget that actually supports the students in the classroom, or with today being innovative technology, support the students in the home?
So let me answer that a couple of ways, ma'am. There's a lot of things that we do. So we provide internet for the entire school district. It's wireless in every classroom. We provide all the phones in the school system. So all the phones are in the class. We have a phone in every classroom. We provide the printing in all throughout the school district. Both our staff and our students are able to print. Our students are able to print in certain locations in the school, not in every printer. Okay. We also provide devices. Right now we have over 150,000 devices throughout the school district. A device can be a computer, a desktop, a laptop, an iPad, a Chromebook, all of those, iPod, all these different devices. So some of these schools allow students to bring, some of our schools allow their students to bring the devices home. And in other cases, they're in carts in the classroom. Okay, so there's a variety of tools that we provide for students. We also have Google Apps. So many of our teachers and our students use Google Apps both at home, and at work to do their daily work. Okay.
It's probably important to note that while the chief of IT has a systemic approach, many schools through their Title I funds or additional resources can provide additional technology. So I use this example a lot. If you go to William Packer Elementary School and you walk towards the back, Ms. Clowers can show you a Dell lab and a Mac lab that she's been able to purchase through the use of additional resources. So not all the resources in his shop cover a lot of the devices and technology that you see in the classroom.
Thank you so very much. I was just trying to figure out actually what your IT covered, because when I was at Central yesterday, one of the young ladies mentioned about having a SAT online, something that they can start at 9th grade till they get to 11th grade and practice. If they had it online, every student who were interested would able to do it, and it would be a software or something that we had in Prince George's County Public Schools. So I was trying to figure out what part of your IT service software do that, so it can actually help the kids. That's something where we can help the kids in the home environment. It's not something that maybe it could be an online credit, online class, but something that they can do separate. So I was just trying to figure out what part of your IT. But thank you so very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Queen. Ms. Williams.
Hi, Wes.
Hi, Ms. Williams.
My question is around future opportunities for us in Prince George's County. Using technology. With our winters and our small number of snow days, if we took a page from the North Carolina School District to use technology during those snow days so that it doesn't count against us. The first challenge that comes to mind is that not every student has access to a computer at home. The second challenge is students may not have access to the internet at home.
The ones who want.
We have community partners in the county, such as Comcast and Verizon, that offer programs for families who need service through their office. So I would like for us to consider what it would take for us to get to that point, either through offering the one-to-ones to take home for those that qualify under a certain income level, and to see what it would take to partner with Verizon or Comcast to offer the service in the home of those needy families. I think that in addition to the snow day fix, I think it would be helpful to supplement, like my colleague Ms. Queen just mentioned, some of those classes at home. I think that it would do our school a good service to have that opportunity to use technology to provide support to our students, the opportunity to do extra when they're at home. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms.
Certainly
Williams.
provide some estimates for you, Ms. Williams.
Colleagues, let's move now to the accountability section. Thank you, sir. We have about 19 more minutes in this section before we get to public testimony. Colleagues, I'll now recognize questions. Mr. Wallace? That's okay, sir.
Nothing wrong with starting first. Good evening. I just had a quick question, which will probably end up being 4 or 5 minutes. Under page 140, strategic planning and resource management. And I believe I alluded to this last year during the budget, but I just wanted to reinforce my understanding. Looking under the core services, the second bullet is where this department supports the district staff by finding and partnering in grant opportunities in excess of $20,000 or more. And my question then and now is, does this office help students and parental groups at school level to obtain grant funding as well?
So the way I would respond to that, and good evening to you all.
Good evening, sir.
The office primarily works directly with central office folks and working on pursuing grant opportunities.
Can you talk a little louder into the mic, please?
Let me get a little closer, sorry. The office primarily works with central office organizations in identifying grant opportunities and following through the procedural process of applying for those grants, as well as through the grant evaluation processes. So working directly with school staff and seeking these. If there's individual questions, they can provide guidance and working with them through the process. But primarily the efforts are at the central office level and seeking and working with folks in grants.
And if the board, my ideas, hopefully, would look at expanding that division by 1 FTE to have someone dedicated to those services for school level. I don't know if it would be in this division or maybe in school support and leadership, Dr. Coleman, but having someone that could look into grant opportunities at a small, minute level, alluding to the initiative that I brought up with Dr. Mason, where students and student groups, student advocacy groups, staff at school level can look at grant opportunities to provide extracurricular activities, fund school trips, to expand the educational opportunities for the students on that school level.
And Mr. Mills, if I can, I had the pleasure of supervising this particular department for the last 2 years. With Dr. Strader also, I know he knows it, is that his team also does training for school level personnel. So many of the 20,000 and below grants, which are your school trips, which are your classroom opportunities, Veronica and her team provide trainings, and they're extremely well attended. Many of them in the boardroom is packed out full of teachers from school. So the capacity is there, and we currently do it. I think it's fair to say that we have the opportunity to do more, but they currently do that right now.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Ahmed.
And Dr. Strader, I want to thank you and your team for all that you do. I think that the types of reports that you pull out are very evidence-based, and I appreciate them in my decision-making when it comes to board matters. I just wanted to make one comment, and that comment is that I think there's a unique opportunity here to look at, in your office, the ability to decrease or consolidate testing so that we aren't in this cycle of, state tests with county tests and in that cycle of just simply testing our students instead of teaching them. And so I guess a question is, are there plans, is there a goal to decrease testing from your office?
Currently, we're doing exactly as you're suggesting. We're meeting and reviewing our current assessment program, in particular our local assessment program, to make sure it's as efficient as possible. Right now, we have several assessments. Our local assessment program is comprised of roughly 13 different assessments to address 13 different needs of our district, everything from identifying our gifted and talented students to measuring the benchmarks in mathematics and ELA. So our assessment program needs some refinement, and so we are looking at all levels, elementary, middle, and high school, to make the process as efficient as possible. We're approaching some major contractual breaks here, and so we're trying to take advantage of that time, again, to move forward with a more consolidated plan. Thank you.
Okay, I'd appreciate that reflected as a goal or an expected outcome in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ahmed. Mr. Murray?
Yeah, I didn't really have a question. I just wanted to say that I echo your review of our current testing policies. I know that in talking to teachers, I was at Laurel a few weeks ago, and just the amount of disruption that the quantity of assessments that we have, and obviously some of them are state tests and some of them are unavoidable, but it sounded like there were some opportunities for reduction in terms of ones that the county requires. And so I've actually been talking to other board members and looking at starting a work group around it, and would love to have you be a part of that.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Ms. Queen?
Question to you is, have we ever thought about, I'm actually very diverse and I believe in innovating teaching technologies and strategies. When we talk about trips, instead of so much in classroom tests, have we thought about taking the kids to museums or science centers and where they can be tested and they can have hands-on, because I'm a hands-on person, more so sit down. We have to learn to be creative within our school system and be diverse, because every student learns different. I may not be a student who can sit there and do a textbook test, but if you take me somewhere, I can give you the answer. So are we diverse, that we're actually a school system that is doing tests that is created for every child to be able to pass the test?
So let me respond. We do provide a lot of out-of-class experiences so that our students understand and are able to receive content. But we opt for a standardized assessment that's dictated, and we have to follow the guidelines set by Maryland State Department of Education. And those do not require that we go to a facility and then complete a form. We have to do a set testing site with a window on the standardized assessment that's provided by the state, so that then we can look at data analysis and then begin to compare our students across the state.
Thank you, Ms. Queen. Ms. Williams.
Good evening. In the supplement section A, we list the restrictive grants. Is there a place located, or can we locate a listing of the non-restrictive grants, or even some of the more private grants that we get from either individuals that are school-wide or system-wide? School-based or system-wide? Do we have that listing available?
So that listing would not be in his area. Many of the private grants that we may get, I'll use Kevin Durant is probably the best example. Those resources are not placed in the accountability office. They're either through our foundation, or in many cases, there's a conduit in which that money is given to us. So the Community Foundation of Prince George's County, the Greater Washington Community Foundation, and others. The Redskins, for example, provide a resource for us as well. So we can provide you a list of grants that have been received by the district and the amount of money, but they're often to a specific purpose to a certain school. His grants, restricted grants, you can talk a little more, Dr. Strader, on what those grants are and what they focus on.
So the restricted grants within the Division of Accountability are primarily limited to the Title I federal funding grants, which are focused to particular schools that have certain percentages of students receiving free meals. And it's primarily a subsidy grant to assist with those students in their instructional programs. So the grants, again, that we manage are on the federal side.
So I'm just trying to go back to the expected outcomes for this department. On page 140, where we talk about the resource management, we say that we're seeking to increase it.
Please talk a little louder into the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're seeking to increase it by $5 million. So what is your current baseline? Where are we now with that? On page 140.
So again, the efforts of this office, as Mr. Rhodes mentioned, they also assist in working with other school entities, other entities, in training and pursuing grants and grant opportunities. That's what they're looking to do here, and that is to seek other outside opportunities through grants, through other grants that are available, publicly funded grants and so on, that they could seek to assist the district in subsidizing some of this funding.
So through this expected outcome, do we have anyone seeking grants or going out and seeking opportunities for grants?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. So Director Veronica Harrison has a team of 3 that does a great job of finding grants, looking at grant solicitations. The best tangible example is a couple of years ago, the Department of Labor put out a $7 million grant opportunity that the county was able to receive. Her office was critically involved in helping shape that grant, work with subject matter experts in our school system to write the grant and ultimately submit the grant. So the additional yield of $5 million is based off of the role that department plays in helping pull the right people together to do a grant. It's not just writing it, but there's a heavy component of the administrative side of actually doing what the feds require to actually receive the resource.
So my question really is around knowing where we are today. If we have 100 million grants that are out there today under this, $5 million in my mind would not be a stretch. If we're at $6 million and you're saying we're going to stretch ourselves another $5 million, then I can say, yeah, that's a stretch. I'm just trying to understand what's the baseline, and is this $5 million a stretch to help us move the needle on achieving our goals? This just says that we're going to increase it by $5 million. If we're at $100 million, $5 million is not going to, it'll make a difference, but it's not going to be a big difference.
So in the expected outcomes section for every department, as each chief comes to present, I'm actually reviewing the outcomes as we're going through this process as well and requesting baseline data. So you'll get a revised document at the completion of this budget process that will have that revision that's already been noted for the second expected outcome to have that baseline data.
Colleagues, we have 8 more minutes before we have to receive testimony from our public that's come here. So let's move to the Chief of Staff section. Thank you, sir. And I'll receive questions now regarding the Chief of Staff section of the budget. Mr. Burrows. Mr. Wallace.
Shockingly, I have no question.
Mr. Burrows.
Colleagues, Mr. Earl O'Neill, who's been the PTSA president here at Friendly for 30 years, has entered the room. I want to acknowledge you.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, and he advocated to build this auditorium that we're currently in now, and also the gym. So
thank you, sir.
Dr. Goldston, when I look at the expected outcomes for the Chief of Staff's position or department, it says ensured timely 48 hours response to all inquiries to the Chief of Staff's office. I would assume that would be the expectation for every office. There's nothing notable about that. So, I mean, I think that's one thing there. And then to respond to 100% of central office internal audit findings on time. When you say respond, do you mean to ensure that the internal audit findings are implemented and corrected? Is that how you define respond, or acknowledging receipt? Is that the response?
No, so as you know, Mr. Burrows, there's a formal process for internal audit. Internal audit brings the audit to the board. His time, Ms. Berkeley, his time, okay. Give him his 10 additional seconds, sir. As you know, the internal audit process requires several parts. One is that the audit is completed. The second is that it's submitted to you all. And then there's an actual response that has to happen. As you know, historically, the PGCPS has actually lacked in the area of providing a timely response. That was several audits last year that identified that. Since Dr. Goldston's come on board, that's one of the clear areas for her staff to make sure we respond with a full action plan. Now, there's a separate component around the implementation of that action plan. That's often left up to the executive sponsor, the appropriate chief, the department, and obviously over you for oversight. So that's what that response is, not just acknowledgement of receipt, but making sure that we submit the action plan that's required on time, which we haven't historically done.
And whose responsibility is it to ensure that the internal audit recommendations, that action plan is implemented?
They vary based on who's actually assigned on that internal audit. So when you receive the internal audit report, you'll see who it's to, and that's that department that's expected to complete that action plan. What we then do is keep a chart of who has that action plan, who's been assigned to it, what's the date that it was expected to be turned in. At the school level, Dr. Coley actually looks to see if there are any repeat findings. If they then report as chiefs to me, I then use them and complete them in our one-on-one to follow up as well.
Understood. And then review 100% of the administrative procedures to ensure monitoring and compliance. And when you say review, are you reading them? Like, what does that review process look like?
So actually, we have an Excel file that lists every administrative procedure that exists in PGCPS. I've then sorted those based on the date of which they were administered, and then have now disseminated them amongst every chief to go back and revise procedures within a certain time frame that are outdated. And I have asked the chief of staff to monitor and follow up. They have a goal of making sure all of those procedures are updated in April so that we can have them posted by July 1, 2019.
Okay. Also, there's over $4 million in contracted services. If you could submit to the board prior to the budget vote a list of all those contracted services, what exactly they are.
Sure, we actually did that. On page 4 of the questions, we submitted the list of the contracts, the amount of the contracts as well.
I would like to see the contracts.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burrows. Okay. Dr. Golson and your staff team, thank you all so much.
Thank you for
do
getting
you have
us
any final
on time.
comments for us? Well, thank you all. Thank you all so much. Colleagues, we will now move to the next component, which is to hear from the public who've registered and signed up to speak to us. As individuals signed up to speak, they were advised of the parameters. You have 3 minutes to speak. Board members will not respond to anything you say. It's not out of disrespect. It's the protocol. I would ask you to please be guided by the instructions that you were given as you signed up. And I would like the first person, who is one of our 11th grade students at the Parkdale High School, Elizabeth Rodas, to please come forward. Are you here? I don't see Ms. Rodas coming, so I'll go to the next speaker.
I beg your pardon. We have to adjourn the first meeting and then open up the budget work session before we have the public session.
A motion is in order. Motion is in order. It's properly moved and seconded that we adjourn the budget work session. Any questions about that? Hearing none, those in favor, please say aye. Those opposing, no. The ayes have it. Now, what I said earlier, so I won't repeat it. Is Ms. Rodas here? I don't want to skip her. If not, is Ms. Latrice Hopper here? She's an individual. Ms. Hopper. Miss Rebecca Muse. Ms. Muse from the Maya Angelou French Immersion School, who's a parent. Ms. Muse. I think I only have Thank you, Ms. Muse, for registering and speaking to us. Please proceed.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
First, I would like to thank Dr. Golson and her leadership team, because they've been very instrumental in helping our school recently. But I came here today to speak about 2 additional issues that our school is advocating for. In the language immersion school, our students are exposed to French only. With the wealth of French online sites, read aloud textbooks, science and math and social study videos, our scholars need even greater online access to supplemental material, like World Books, Khan Academy, and Discovery Education. The internet gives our scholar the enhanced research we have been actively fundraising for. This year, we raised $7,000 through fundraising that has been used to purchase rolling Chromebook carts and 20 Chromebooks that we were able to fill. We do have a second fundraiser this spring that we're trying to do in order to gain 16 more Chromebooks. We are here today to ask the board to please assist our school in advocating for a one-to-one device for our students. Our students deserve nothing less. Equity matters. Supporting our programs with proper resources is needed in how we will ensure their success. My next ask of the board is in regards to middle year's IB World School continuation. In 2016, Maya Angelou French Immersion was proud to become one of 2 primary year IB World School programs in Prince George's County. Our kindergarten through 5th grade scholars are taught using this framework of international baccalaureate learning, but it stops in grades 6 through 8. This means that if our scholars want to graduate to a high school IB diploma program, they must reapply, rather than being afforded the continuation of the MYP like between Melwood and James Madison. Our scholars must stop their IB learning for 3 years and then, if accepted, return to the IB learning in high school. Our learning community is split between elementary classes that follow this style of learning and middle school classes. We ask that you help our scholars be fully prepared to enter the IP diploma program by funding our middle years programs for the Maya Angelou French Immersion World IB School. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. The next individual is Alex Hernandez, speaking as an individual. Mr. Hernandez.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and board members, for allowing me to address you tonight. My name is Alex Hernandez, and I'm the Director of Religious Education at St. Ambrose in Cheverly and St. Mary's in Landover Hills. I'm here today to talk to you briefly about the importance of investing in trauma-informed training for all staff in our schools, the need for educational equity, and for better access to mental health services for our vulnerable students through a partnership with Department of Human Health and Services. Every year I work with hundreds of children and youth that attend our public schools. I've come to know many stories of our students whom we as a county have failed. Consider the case of one of my students, for example, named Emmanuel. He attempted to commit suicide in the summer of 2017 at the age of 15. Emmanuel used to miss classes regularly, and his mom, Claudia, did not know what to do or where to turn for help. She went to school, the only place she thought could help her. Claudia doesn't speak much English. Sometimes she would get an interpreter, but often she had to rely on her daughter to play that role. When Claudia sought help for her son from a school counselor, she was told that she needed to take Emmanuel to a psychologist. Her son's absenteeism and attempted suicide, she was told, was not their concern. The mother was also advised that she should wait until Emmanuel turned 16 years old so he could drop out of high school without any penalties. And that's what she did. A few months later, Emmanuel moved to another state and began working a construction job. The school had the opportunity to help a traumatized student, but no help was given. There are many cases like this that I could share with you. As you probably know, the high school graduation rate for Latinos in PG County is 45% and just above 26% for those living in Langley Park. Many of them come from the marginalized indigenous communities that have lived through unspeakable violence and suffering from chronic trauma. We must invest in trauma-informed training for all staff, especially teachers. In addition, our county schools must build partnerships with the Department of Health and Human Services to bring the mental health services to our vulnerable students. I was thrilled to hear that our new county executive considers education her #1 priority and that she believes we rise or sink together. Let us be collaborative, creative, and courageous in responding to the systemic failures that stand in the way of achieving educational equity in our counties. I count on your dedication to the common good and hope that your budget decisions will reflect in a special way the needs of those most vulnerable to us. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. The next speaker is Nancy Leon, speaking as an individual. Ms. Leon.
Hello, good evening. Thank you so much for having us here today. My name is Nancy Leon, and I was born and raised in Prince George's County, and I'm a college graduate, and I'm currently working in the county because I want to work in my community. I'm here today to tell the story of my friend Maria, a Honduran immigrant and the mother of 3 children. She's not here today because, as many in the community feel, they fear retaliation from the county for speaking out on their experiences with the school system. But I will tell her story today. She is a Prince George's County resident and the mother of 3 children. Her 2 youngest children attended McCormick Elementary School in Langley Park. During this time, both her children experienced bullying that escalated to physical violence. One of her children's hands was broken as a result of an altercation with a bully, and the other was stabbed with a pencil on various occasions by a classmate. As any parent would be, she was confused and frustrated at how this could be happening to both her children, so she went to school wanting answers. On her many visits, there was only one secretary available to translate for her, and if she was unavailable, she would have to speak for herself with her limited English. This led to many difficulties and misunderstandings while trying to deal with these complicated issues involving her children. At one point, she was even told through the secretary that she would be banned from the school and would not be allowed to attend any further meetings. This was hard for her to understand, as the reason she was at the school was because she wanted the best for her children. She wanted them to succeed, and she very much values their education. But she felt that she was being chastised for attempting to speak up for the safety of her children, and that generally, with the difficulties of translation, they were completely misunderstanding her. As many of you may know, immigrant families from Central America flee poverty, gang violence, and lack of opportunity. They look to the U.S. for a better life, only for their children to experience bullying and at times discrimination for their ethnicity. The experience of my friend Maria compels me to urge you to increase bilingual staff at schools and assure that staff are appropriately trained to understand the unique challenges and difficulties that immigrant parents and children face when they come to the U.S. No parent should feel like their child is unsafe at school, and no parent or student should receive discriminatory treatment by staff based off of their ethnicity, primary language, or place of origin. We plead that you allocate funds to minimize these situations from occurring to other families. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Ms. Jacqueline Ramos, please come forward. Please.
I need a translator, please.
I'm sorry, you need an interpreter? Okay. Translate? Okay. Someone? He's coming? Okay.
¿Cómo quiere hacerle? ¿Quiere leer como 3 pedazos y que después yo le continúe?
Sí. Tengo líneas acá.
Para que escuchen su voz.
Ok. ¿De una vez? Muy buenas tardes a todos los miembros de la mesa directiva. Mi nombre es Jacqueline, vivo en la ciudad de Lanham. Mi familia y yo llegamos de Perú hace ya casi 2 años.
Good evening, everybody, and good evening, all the members of the board. My name is Jacqueline, and I live in the city of Lanham. My family and I arrived from Peru about 2 years back.
Les presento mi testimonio no con la intención de desvalorar el trabajo que realizan las escuelas. Al contrario, lo hago para ayudar con el desarrollo educativo que ustedes realizan con gran amor y dedicación en bienestar de nuestras niñas y niños.
I want to present you my testimony today, but not with the intention of depreciating the work that you guys are conducting at the schools. Quite the opposite. I want to help the development of education and also help you guys with the work you guys are executing with love, dedication, and for the well-being of all the students.
En Perú, mi hija estaba en el 8º grado y era muy buena estudiante. Y aquí, al llegar a la escuela, fue asignada al 8º grado, pero la pusieron en aulas con niños de 6º grado, excepto 2 materias.
In Peru, my daughter was in 8th grade and she was a very good student. Then here, she arrived at a school and was assigned at an 8th grade level, but she was placed in classroom with kids from a 6th grade, except in 2 subjects.
Este aspecto no contribuyó al pasar al 9º grado, donde tuvo muchas dificultades tanto en lo académico como en el idioma, originando mucha frustración emocional en mi hija y desventaja frente a las demás estudiantes de su nueva escuela.
This aspect didn't help or contribute to her obtaining her promotion to the 9th grade, where she encountered difficulties on the academic aspect as well as the language barrier. This also caused great frustration and as well as emotional distress to my daughter because of the disadvantage she had amongst her peers at this new school.
El día de orientación, donde explicaban las necesidades y las acciones que debieran realizar los padres de familia, toda la exposición lo hacían en inglés. Las notas informativas entregadas a los padres en dicha actividad eran también solo en inglés. Mi esposo y yo estábamos muy preocupados por no saber qué hacer para ayudar a nuestra hija.
On the day of orientation, where everything was explained, all the expectations and also the actions needed, everything that the parents should know was explained only in English. The notices, the newsletters that were handed to the parents of such activity, again, was only in English. My husband and I were very concerned because we didn't really understand how we could help our daughter.
En el transcurso del año escolar, la comunicación con la consejera de octavo fue casi nula por el idioma. Necesitábamos de alguien que nos diera una explicación integral de lo que ofrecía la escuela. Faltaba un guía que atendiera y absolviera nuestras preocupaciones como padres.
During the school year, the communication with the counselor was not really helpful because of the language barrier. We really needed somebody that would give us a full, detailed explanation of what we could help with at the school. We really were in dire need of a guide that would help us resolve any concerns that we have over our daughter.
Necesitábamos alguien que nos asesorara en las acciones correctas que debíamos realizar dentro del plano educativo. Pudimos ver claramente que nuestra hija no recibía la educación adecuada a su grado. Nuestras expectativas con respecto a la educación empezaron a bajar. Llegamos a pensar que era así por ser inmigrantes. Nuestra frustración por la falta de comunicación e información ocasionó momentos de incomodidad tanto para nosotros los padres como para los maestros que nos atendían.
Again, we were in dire need of an advocate that would guide us with all the necessary actions we needed to do to help our daughter get her education, and we needed to see how we could clearly help our daughter receive that education appropriate for her grade. Our expectations with respect with the education were met low, and also we at one point managed to think that it was because we were immigrants. Our frustration was because of lack of communication and information that at moments became uncomfortable because us parents didn't understand what the teachers were trying to express.
Yo creo que todos los niños, sin distinción, tienen derecho a la educación y a las oportunidades de desarrollarse intelectualmente, valorando y considerando con objetividad sus talentos. Ojalá ustedes puedan ponerse en nuestro lugar, ya que el propósito de todos los padres es ayudar a sus hijos a obtener buena educación y no ser una carga, sino miembros productivos de la sociedad.
I believe that all kids without discrimination have a right to an education and the opportunities necessary to develop intellectually and also be appreciated and considered to appreciate those talents that they have. Hopefully, as parents and as a group, we could get together so that we could have a purpose that all parents should help their kids obtain a better education and not at a cost to them. And for them to be able to become successful members of the community.
I'm sorry, I'll have to stop you there. I gave you 6 minutes because of the interpretation, so thank you for your comments. Thank you very much. I will now recognize thank you very much. I will now recognize Ms. Garcia, Mary Garcia. Would you please, please leave the comments with us, the hard copy comments?
Yeah,
Please ask her
I'll
to
get
do
them
that.
for you.
Yeah, ask her to do that for us. When there is interpretation involved, I will give 6 minutes, so please proceed.
Buenas noches, estimados miembros de la Junta de Educación del Condado de Prince George. Les agradezco la oportunidad de hablar con ustedes. Me llamo Mari García, vivo con mi familia en Upper Marlboro, estoy muy involucrada en mi parroquia y me encanta dedicar mi tiempo por el bien común. La razón por la cual estoy aquí es porque estoy muy preocupada por la educación de los miles de niños y jóvenes inmigrantes en nuestro condado. Muchos de ellos y sus familias enfrentan en sus vidas y las escuelas grandes obstáculos, encima de la pobreza en que vive la mayoría de ellos. Hay mucho trauma y profundo miedo en la comunidad inmigrante, sea por su estatus migratorio, el miedo de la separación de sus familias, el miedo o la experiencia personal de la violencia.
Good evening, board members. My name is Mary Garcia. I live with my family in Upper Marlboro, and I am very involved in my parent role, and I like to dedicate my time for the well-being of the rest of everybody. The reason why I'm here today is because I am very concerned about the education of thousands of children and teens that are immigrants in our county. A lot of them and their families are encountering obstacles not only at a school level but in their personal lives as well. On top of the poorness that they are suffering and living in, a lot of them have trauma, deep fear in the community, that immigrant community, whether it be because of their legal status or the fear of the separation of the families or fear of a personal experience due to violence.
Quisiera contarles sobre mi sobrino Edgar. Él llegó aquí de El Salvador hace 3 años y entró a una de las escuelas de nuestro condado al 10º grado. Edgar es un buen muchacho, muy respetuoso y bien criado. Sin embargo, en su escuela habían otros muchachos muy problemáticos que le presionaban para que se uniera a ellos. Cuando mi sobrino se negó a ingresar a su grupo, le pegaron muy fuerte. Edgar se quedó con 2 heridas muy feas en su cara.
I want to share with you a case about my nephew, Edgar. Edgar came here from El Salvador about 3 years ago, and he entered one of the schools in our county at the 10th grade level. Edgar is a well-rounded kid. He is very respectful, and he's well-mannered, but when he entered in school, he encountered a group of kids that were troubled kids, and they were pressuring him to join their group. When my nephew didn't want to join their group, he was beat up, and he did suffer 2 severe injuries to his face.
Esto sucedió al frente de un maestro que no hizo nada para apoyarle. Mi sobrino se quedó aterrorizado. También su padre tuvo mucho miedo de defender a su hijo. Él no conocía a nadie de confianza en la escuela de su hijo quien pudiera indicar qué hacer. Él tenía mucho miedo de meterse en problemas con las pandillas o la policía. En estos casos delicados y complicados, una traducción por teléfono no sirve.
This happened in front of the teacher that did nothing to support my nephew. My nephew was left in shock, and also his father had a lot of fear to defend his son. He didn't know anybody that he could trust within the school, and also somebody that could guide him on what steps to take. He was in fear because of the personal problems he might encounter with gangs or the police. In these very delicate and complicated cases, a interpretation or translation by phone doesn't work.
Dentro y afuera de las escuelas se ve el creciente problema de las pandillas. Esto perjudica a todos, especialmente a la comunidad inmigrante que se queda más impactada, sea por la violencia o las extorsiones. Los papás, los maestros, la comunidad podrían ser un apoyo y prevención de este problema, pero esto no funciona si no hay buena comunicación.
Within and outside the schools of this growing problem of the gangs, this is something that is affecting everybody, especially that immigrant community that leaves with the biggest impact, whether it's due to violence or extortions. The teachers, the community have to do something in support and also to prevent problems. But again, this doesn't function, this doesn't work without good communication.
Por esto pido respetuosamente que se tome en cuenta en el presupuesto la gran necesidad de contratar a más consejeros y trabajadores sociales bilingües capacitados para responder a un joven como mi sobrino u otros alumnos y sus familias impactadas por un trauma o paralizados por el miedo. Debemos invertir urgentemente en los niños y jóvenes más vulnerables, quienes son condenados a fracasar por la falta de comprensión, atención y recursos.
This is why I'm here to ask you guys to take in consideration all that I've mentioned in the budget, because there is a great need to hire counselors and also social workers that are bilingual and capacitated to respond to these cases like the one suffered by my nephew, and also other students and families that are impacted by the trauma or they're paralyzed by such great fear. We really have to urgently help these young kids and children hope, because they are very vulnerable at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Ramos. And I will now ask Nori Oscuro to please come forward. And that would be 3 minutes then? Okay, 3 minutes, please proceed.
Okay. Good evening, members of the Board of Education. My name is Noriluz Oscuro. I graduated from the class of 2015 at Parkdale High School. I am speaking on behalf of first-generation students and DACA recipients. On my last year in high school, I needed to be informed on the requirements and steps on how to apply to college. Because of the lack of knowledge of the school education system my parents had, my only choice was to depend on my guidance counselor. First, I had a difficult time making an appointment with my counselor because most of the time she was not available. Second, when I informed her that I was a DACA recipient, she could not help me any further. This was one of the hardest moments of my life because when I asked for help, they could not help me. Not until I registered for Prince George's Community College did I learn about scholarships and other resources to help a first-generation college student. It would be most valuable to provide funds for professional development training and cultural receptivity to reduce bias among all professional educators in the school system. Also, it is essential to increase the number of bilingual school counselors, assess their responsibilities, and create time in their schedules to meet students most affected and in need. Every parent wants the best for their children, and within our community, we are forming mentor groups to help our children through their education process. However, strong support within our education system would help our children to succeed even more.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Stephanie Mobley.
Thank you, Chairman, Dr. Alvin Thornton, and board members for the opportunity to speak here today. My name is Stephanie Mobley. I am from St. Camilla's Church, and I am part of the Catholic community of the northern area of Prince George's County. I am here to represent a partnership of many parishes throughout the county that have come together to advocate for educational equity in Prince George's County. Today, 50 people are here representing this partnership. Could you please stand? Over 1,000 parishioners, proud yet very concerned residents of the county, have signed onto the letter that I'm presenting here today. We are calling for improved services and conditions in the Prince George's County Public Schools. We urge the members of the Board of Education to provide more funding to serve the needs of the most vulnerable, including the immigrant children and families of the county school system. Many children in our public schools suffer from adverse childhood experiences. Many of them are African American, recently arrived immigrant children from Central America and Africa, refugees from war-torn countries such as Syria and Afghanistan, and students from various other backgrounds. These children need individualized attention in a safe, supported school environment to be able to overcome past adversities. Over the past few years, thousands of refugee children have arrived in Prince George's County and have been incorporated into our public schools. According to the United Nations High Commission for Refugee Study, 48% of unaccompanied refugee minors reported personal experience of violence by state or organized crime. 1 in 5 reported abuse at home or by caretakers. We have a moral responsibility to provide a safe school environment and trusting relationships for these children. These elements are indispensable for collective healing and building resiliency. As Frederick Douglass said, it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. Doing justice and successfully meeting these children's needs require grading staffing resources, cultural sensitivity training, wrap-around services, and schools that are not overcrowded. There is extreme overcrowding in the areas of the county that predominantly serve immigrants, children of immigrants, and language minorities. Please continue to prioritize the recommendations proposed by the Feasibility Master Plan to prioritize investment to address the extreme overcrowding in these areas. We must ensure the physical safety and successful learning outcomes of all of our children. We, therefore, urge you to allocate the necessary funding that would strengthen our students' resiliency, mitigate the impact of systemic inequalities and past trauma, reduce overcrowding, and help all our children to learn, grow, and thrive. Please see the attached sheets with the names and addresses of those who have joined together to advocate for a future of hope for all of our children and families in the school system. Thank you so much for your time and hard work on improving our schools. We look forward to continuing to advocate with you to address these critical needs.
Thank you, Ms. Mobley, and those who came with you. The next speaker is Ms. Teresa Mitchell Dudley. Ms. Dudley? I don't see Ms. Dudley, so I'll now call Michelle M. Clark from the PGCEA Board of Directors. Ms. Clark?
Good evening, everyone. As most of you know, we have just begun our bargaining for the common good with the school system. And some of our main objectives in bargaining is to ensure that we have fair compensation for all employees. I will say, obviously, we're bargaining for Unit 1 employees, your certificated staff, but I will say all employees, because I know very well that there are people who don't make a living wage who are in some of the other unions. Also, the restoration of steps. I know we have our compensation task force, which is going over, and while I've never taught math at the high school level or anything higher than early childhood, I do know when I look in Oracle, I'm on step 12. I'm in my 15th year of teaching, and I started on step 2, so I should be at step 16 at this point. I can do the little bit of math there, and the 16 minus 12, that's 4 steps behind. I don't care what other enhancements were made along the way. The bottom line is it's 4 steps. And people might like to change that and tweak it a little bit, but it's 4 steps. When I look at my compensation, that's exactly where we are. And that's what other members will tell you who've been here for a length of time. Some of our other issues are smaller class size, more mental health supports, as many of the other speakers have mentioned, safety and security. We must invest in trauma-informed training for all staff, especially teachers, to help them identify strategies to support trauma-affected students and their families. This is very important. Many teachers are not trained in trauma-informed instruction. We have a number of students, not just refugees and people who've come from other countries, but many of our local students who have been traumatized by a variety of things. When I taught at John E. Howard, a number of years ago. We actually had a kindergartner come in who was crying and couldn't function that day, and all he could say was he saw his uncle get shot the night before. This is a kindergartner. How do you process that at 5 years old? I don't know I could process it at my age, and I'm about 10 times that. So we know that our children are coming from places and have seen things. They need these extra supports. We don't have those supports now. And I will say, having heard from a number of school psychologists lately with their caseload, although they're trained and could provide some of these mental health services, their caseload would not allow them the time to ever go into a room and help our students in that way. And that's about it for my time, so I'll say good night, thank you, and please make sure those things are in the budget.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Our next speaker is Mr. Thomas Duke. Mr. Duke.
Good evening. My name is Tom Duke. I am a homeowner in Prince George's County and grew up in Camp Springs, and I have been an ESOL teacher in Prince George's County since 2007. I understand their problems. I'm with them every day in a classroom. Professional teachers should be paid a single professional salary. They should not have to become an Uber driver to make ends meet. Over 40% of our teachers have second jobs. They have a second shift. The first one's in the classroom where they gave their heart for their profession and to learn it. The second one is to make ends meet. This affects our children, our students, and our students in the classroom. Teachers have enormous student loan debts. Many young teachers with second jobs are still not able to save enough to buy a condo or afford to live in an apartment by themselves. They need roommates. Teacher salaries have not kept up with inflation and competition in surrounding school systems. Experienced teachers are taking 2 or 3 jobs to be able to send their children to college. These second and third jobs wear them down physically, and they are tired in their classrooms. This second shift affects our students in classrooms where learning is our priority. Not one student honored by the Board of Education with scholarships last year at a board meeting wanted a career in teaching. It was an hour of listening to students choose anything but teaching. Not one PG CPS 12th grade student wanted a career which required a second or third job. There are 3 legs to professional teacher compensation. The first leg is to restore steps to the 58% of current teachers who are penalized with a loyalty penalty when they were not paid experience steps while working for PGCPS in 2009, 10, and 11. But new teachers that came into the county, that economic value of that experience was paid for. The second leg of fair compensation stool is to increase the salary scale amounts at every level and lane to attract highly trained teachers for our students. We need to fight teacher burnout from years of classroom teaching and understaffing. Finally, our third leg is to keep our 20-year-plus teachers because their wisdom is invaluable. Their understanding is invaluable. So much talk tonight about supporting teachers and supporting our classrooms and our students. Support our students and us by lifting the burden of a second shift. Support our students and us by removing the loyalty penalty. Support our students and us by paying us a single fair professional teacher salary so we can continue to devote ourselves to our students in the classroom where we work and our students learn every day, and they go through a lot to get through that every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Duke. The next speaker is Tommy Makila. Oh, yeah, Tommy, I know. Hello, Tommy. Sorry about the mispronunciation, please.
That's all right. Good evening. My name is Tommy Makila. I am from Accokeek, and my son attends Oxon Hill High School. He's a junior there. First of all, I would like to thank the board and especially the school system, the budget staff for working with Prince George's County Advocates for Better Schools. I'm an active member of that group. And so working on that budget Q&A session that we've now had a few years, and I believe that is a very valuable addition to this budget process. It helps build knowledge in the community and especially the active parents and community members who want to understand the budget. So I think it's just the kind of actually human capital that you're creating there. So I hope you will continue to work with us on that session. In the future. Then I also want to thank the board and the proposed budget, those who drafted it for the priorities. I've been coming to these meetings for many years, as some of you know, and it's quite rewarding to see when you flip through this budget, to see many of the topics that have been coming up. It's been the reallocating the central office staff, to class size reduction, to teacher supplies, building maintenance and operation, those types of things. A lot of the transportation, see those line items actually increase. So the very topics that have been, the topics that people have been complaining about, talking about, requesting, it's very nice to see so many of those priorities addressed in the budget. And to me, the closest, probably close to my heart when it comes to the priorities that I've been advocating for is the redirection of the resources from the central office to the classrooms. Obviously, I realize a large school system does need a central office, and they play an important role, but I do think that there is hopefully still more room to find some ways to put more money in the classroom, because at the end of the day, that is what counts. That is what makes a difference, how much money you can get into the classroom. Yeah, the people in the central office, in the end of the day, they don't have direct contact with the students. They don't decrease the class size. So just a couple of ideas on that front. Just what I thought that you could pursue in the future is that I've talked to quite a bit of the school system staff. I would recommend maybe you form a group of active principals to kind of evaluate what the services are, valuable services and maybe not so valuable services that the central office provides, so that because they are the ones who are really seeing what the value is, and so they understand that from that perspective. So that would be one way to look at it. I also see a lot of different offices related to like monitoring, assessments, all those types of things. Quite a few when you flip through. So maybe there's some room to consolidate or reduce spending on that front. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your service. The next speaker is Jonathan Abraham. Is Jonathan here? Mr. Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jonathan Abraham. I am the parent of a kindergarten student at Mount Rainier Elementary. And I want to thank all the board members, some of whom I recognize from previous terms, like Ms. Ahmed, Mr. Burrows, Mr. Valentine, Mr. Murray, Ms. Eubanks, and some of our newly elected members, Ms. Queen, and District 3's Ms. Boozer-Struther, and also Mr. Thomas, and obviously yourself, Mr. Chair, with a new season and a new session, and your new duty of keeping these proceedings running smoothly. Socrates, the Greek philosopher, when asked what was the greatest duty of the guardians of the state, replied that creating a good system of elementary education was the first and most important duty. And I mean, how amazing is that responsibility for everybody sitting here? That's a larger than $2 billion budget that you are responsible for, which is greater than most federal agencies as well. And I don't need to tell you what a special place Prince George's County is, with our amazing diversity, cultural and economic. And we have people from West Africa, from the Afro-Caribbean, we have people from Europe, we have people from Latin America, down under, you name it, we've got someone from there. On behalf of the Spanish Integration Committee of Mount Rainier, I'm requesting an amendment to the FY 2020 budget, which will provide the following. And this is school-based resources of adding 1 FTE Spanish immersion teacher to the elementary formula for Mount Rainier, and a 1 FTE Spanish immersion teacher for Thomas Stone Elementary, and a 1 full-time equivalent Spanish immersion coordinator shared between the two schools. Colin Powell said, have a vision and then be demanding. And so I'm not bashful about seeking an allocation of these resources on behalf of the students of Mount Rainier. Firstly, Prince George's ranks in the top 10 of large districts nationwide in terms of our per pupil spending, which comes in this proposed budget at about $15,694. And if we looked at the locked staff, we would need to request the use of the locked staffing formula, because this board holds discretion over 2/3 of the budget, which is in our student-based budget, we get probably about $4,700 per student in Mount Rainier Elementary. But when we look at the full budget, like I think it's like a $15,000, so we do need to ask for these resources from here. There's other notes that I will email as testimony to the board, and there's also a proposal that has been submitted to the administration. And so we look forward, and the Spanish Integration Committee of Mount Rainier look forward to working with you in this budget season, which concludes, I think, towards the end of this month, to see what we can do with this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next speaker is Gerard Tyler from the Maya Angelou French Immersion Program. Mr. Tyler.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to stand and speak before you on tonight. My name is Gerard Tyler. I am the proud father of a 5th grader at the Maryland 5-star Maya Angelou French Immersion and IB World School. I also serve in the capacity of the PTSA president for the school as well. Coming on behalf of our parent community to echo the sentiments of one of my board members who spoke previously, Rebecca Muse. First and foremost, to thank the administration for the help that you have previously provided to Dr. Golston and your administration, to Mr. Rose. I thanked them privately before this meeting. I want to thank him publicly, because now I only have to speak on 2 of the 4 issues that we have before you tonight. The first one is on Chromebooks for our scholars. As I've stated before, we are a French immersion school, and we want to make sure that we offer our students the best educational experience that they can have, and the technology, especially with them learning in French, to have the mobile devices needed is invaluable to our parents and to our scholars. The second issue that I want to bring before you is, again, considering to have a middle year program for our middle school students in regards to the IB program. Currently, the IB program only goes to from K through 5. It's not contiguous with our middle school students, and so they have to make decisions at middle schools whether they want to stay in the school or go to another IB middle school. And so we want to keep our students at Maya Angelou so they can have the IB program and also learn in French. So I ask for your consideration as a friendly alum who graduated here. I'm not going to tell you the year, but I ask for your support. And in regards to the Chromebooks, I just want to echo the sentiments. Not only have we raised $7,000 from fundraising, we are also exploring grants to see if we can supplement the funding needed to purchase those devices. But we do ask for any help that you all can provide in the budget to account for, to get our students on a 1-to-1 ratio with Chromebooks. And with that, I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. The next speaker is Jana Parker. Ms. Parker.
Good evening. Thank you guys for coming out to speak to us about the budget. I do have a couple of budget questions. I know, Dr. Golston, you are very prompt about getting answers to us. I just want to say that I grew up in Prince George's County. I graduated from Friendly. I went to Lower Baltimore before it was called Isaac J. Gordine. Okay, I went to TIAC, National Christian Academy. Like, I have roots in Prince George's County. So when I reach out, I'm reaching out as a constituent, as someone who grew up here, and someone who cares about the county. I taught as a PGCPS teacher for 10 years. Some of you already know that because you're my union rep. So when I reach out, I'm reaching out as a teacher who still goes to her students' basketball games, still mentors children who go to college, still goes to their weddings, babysits their kids. I am Prince George's County, and I represent strong Prince George's County teachers who are dedicated to this county. I want to make sure that's on the record. Now, to be clear, there's an issue with the school-to-prison pipeline, and there are direct questions that we need answered. One of the ones when I'm looking through this budget is, I would like clarification on whether or not the SROs are part of this budget, or if they're part of an instructional contract under the Chief of Staff's budget, and then a clarification as to whether or not the overtime that comes from security officers, if that goes to the SROs. I also have questions about the charter school budget versus the community schools budget. I am a very strong advocate for community schools. I just have a question about the fact that the community schools budget is almost twice the charter school budget, and the charter schools have been in this county for almost 10, 11 years. So why is the charter school, and then they've come on several occasions, I've been at these meetings, and I've seen them we've asked questions about their certification, we've asked questions about their test scores, we've asked questions about their research and all this other stuff. So then why is the charter school budget for that office so small, and the community schools, as I understand, is still a growing program, and you only are gonna have maybe 1 or 2 schools actually operating in that model? I need clarification on that as well. That's specific in the budget that I'm reading. I do thank everyone for coming out. I realize that if you're on the board, you have a vested interest within our school system. And I hope that you start to or continue to work diligently for our school system. Because people like me still live here, we're going to live here, we're going to remain here, and we're going to hold you accountable. And that's not to say that you aren't doing a great job. Dr. Golson, I've spoken to you personally, and I told you I'm very happy with the direction our county is going. But that doesn't mean that there aren't still gaps that we need to address and hold everybody accountable for. Thank you again for coming out to my school, because I did graduate from Finley, and have a wonderful night.
Thank you for your testimony. I'll now call Maria Chavez. Please come forward. And I don't see Ms. Chavez, I don't think. And our final speaker is Ms. Teresa Dudley, who's president of PGCEA. Ms. Dudley.
Good afternoon, good evening.
Good evening.
I'm sorry, I was at a basketball game. I didn't know there was a meeting down. That was a joke.
You don't have to display your priorities, please.
So I'll tell you what my priorities are. I do like the Wizards, though. So here we are at a budget hearing where many of you know the priorities of PGCEA, and I just want to clarify some of them. We have been working very closely with our delegation in Annapolis, attending the hearing in support of the school system, and we are working together so that our priorities are reached. We do want to make sure that the budget is reflective of the things that we know the Kirwan Commission says that we need. We know that the Kirwan Commission, which was based on the Thornton Commission, we know that. The Community Schools Pilot Initiative that we are working on, where I'm vice chairing the pilot committee, and I do want to say that we need to make sure that whatever resources the community schools need, is such as the site coordinators, so that all of the preparation work can be put in place so that we do community schools right. It is important for us to have a transition program for a school that is not performing well that works. The other thing that we need to make sure, and I'm looking at my phone here, is that the restorative practices office gets the expansion that it needs so that we can provide the training for restorative practices for our young people. We heard Ms. Parker talk about ending the school to prison pipeline. Restorative justice is very important to us. This is Black Lives Matter in School Week, and I want to officially thank you for your support of this initiative, because it's important that our children know that their lives do matter and that we make sure that we keep them out of the penal system. We also need to have cultural competency training. It was cut out of the budget several times, and you know, we just had an incident where, a very publicized incident where one of our educators said something inappropriate to someone. You know what, if she just called a guy a jerk and hadn't used a racially insensitive term, we probably wouldn't have had the embarrassing situation, but cultural competency is important for all of our educators because especially when we talk about our large Latino population, we need to make sure that with 140 different languages being spoken, that we're aware of all of the different cultures. And of course, I would be remiss in my last 12 seconds if I didn't say that compensation is not important to retain good educators. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, we will have, and to the community, we will have two more sessions, work sessions and public hearings regarding the budget. The next one will be on February 11th at the High Point High School, beginning at 5 o'clock, the work session, and the public hearing will begin at 7. The final one will be on February 19th at the Fairmont Heights High School, the work session beginning at 5, and the public hearing beginning at 7. I'll receive a motion to end and adjourn. Properly moved and seconded. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposing say no. The ayes have it. Thanks to all who testified, and good evening.